Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Stuart Cohen from the Cybersecurity Collaborative. Thank you very much for joining our open webinar today. We're going to get started in just a moment. We're just waiting for a few other people to log in that registered for today's open webinar. Thank you for attending today's session. We are looking forward to talking about software patching and software updates with the Cyber Readiness Institute and with David Ortiz from Bed Bath & Beyond. We will get started in just a few minutes, and then we'll be able to answer some of your questions as well on the topic. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Stuart Cohen from the Cybersecurity Collaborative. Thank you so much for attending today's open webinar. We are fortunate enough to have Craig Moss from the Cyber Readiness Institute and David Ortiz from Bed Bath & Beyond as today's presenters. Before we get started, just wanted to tell you a little bit about this program. Our open webinars are open. They are not confidential. So for the members of the Cybersecurity Collaborative, this will not be confidential, and you will not be bound by the subscription agreement and the confidentiality agreement that you signed. We will have a written summary of this available that'll be available probably around the end of next week for you to have as well. We are very fortunate to be part of the Cyber Readiness Institute Champions programs. We were one of the founding champions. We were at the event in January when they announced their open source tools and their mission and focus to help businesses around the world get started, get smarter, and be better prepared from a cybersecurity standpoint. So we are very excited to be involved with them as one of their champions around the world, as well as with the supply chains of the various organizations that they work with. I will turn it over to them in a minute for today's discussion and Q&A. But if you have a question, please submit it in the question box or the chat box, and we will do our best to get to all of your questions after some remarks from each one of our two speakers today. We'll also have a couple of poll questions that we'd appreciate if you could answer towards the end of today's session. It is important to us. We distribute that back to our Corporate Leadership Council and our Community Leadership Council for feedback on different activities that we should be involved with. Before we get started, I just want to say we are doing 4 of these sessions throughout the year with the Cyber Readiness Institute, covering the 4 pillars that they focused on, that they identified when they first launched their open source tools and their mission and vision to help small organizations. This is the second one of these. We will have 2 more later in the year that I will talk about later in today's session. But with that, I would first of all like to introduce David Ortiz will be with us from Bed Bath & Beyond. He is the Chief Information Security Officer there. He will be talking about his perspective on software patching and software updates, both from a corporate standpoint and also as if he was a sole security practitioner or part-time security practitioner, what he would do and some suggestions he would have for you if that's the environment that you're in. And with that, I want to introduce Craig Moss. Craig Moss is one of the executives at the Cyber Readiness Institute and has been instrumental in launching the program and getting it started to help organizations around the world. So with that, Craig, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Stuart. It's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be getting a chance to speak with you and David. So just real quick background on our organization. We're a not-for-profit. We pulled together these co-chairs that you see here that all had a shared mission of wanting to help to improve the cybersecurity of small businesses in the value chain. And we're very fortunate to have the backing of these organizations and individuals to really try to drive this issue forward. What we talk about in terms of cyber readiness is really focusing on the preventative measures that an organization can take to try to reduce their risk, and then to at least have a basic idea of what to do if an incident occurs. So again, if you think about small and mid-sized businesses, for those of you listening in, if you're with a large company, don't just think about your organization, think about those small companies that are part of your value chain. If you're with a smaller organization listening in, of course, this is more directly relevant to you. But what are the things that you can do to try to prevent cyber incidents? And then would people know what to do if something happened? And we saw that there was a lot of weakness in that. A lot of organizations, people don't have the most basic idea of what to do. So the goals of our program are really, again, focused on small, mid-sized businesses. Based on the research that we did with our co-chairs and our other members, we really looked at 4 areas that ballpark would reduce cyber risk by 80% if organizations got good at these 4 things. Passwords, software updates, which is what we're going to talk about today, phishing, and the use of USBs and removable media. What we look for is how do you create a culture where cyber readiness is part of how people do their jobs? And that sounds easy, but it's really difficult. And one of the things that we see in a lot of organizations is that the pendulum goes back and forth, and it swings from being too open until something happens, and then it becomes too restrictive. And what happens in that pendulum swing is that organizations end up with a workaround culture instead of a cyber ready culture. And we see that in a lot of large companies too, is that there's policies that get put in place. Maybe it's like nobody can use a USB. Maybe it's that you must change your password every 60 days and you can never write it down. These are all policies that are written and pushed out, but when you really dig into it, you find that most people don't do it. And what happens in a workaround culture is that people with good intent to do their jobs end up ignoring policies. And then it becomes very subjective about what policies they listen to and what policies they ignore. And that's really the worst. So what we wanted to do is to boil it down to some simple areas and then help organizations put things in place to help to prevent cyber risk in those simple areas. The other thing that we focus on is extending the cyber ready culture to the organizations you deal with. No company is an island when it comes to cybersecurity. You're all interconnected. You're sharing data, you're sharing system access with others. How is it that you can extend that idea of cyber readiness into your value chain, whether it be on the supply side, the professional services, your IT vendors, or it could be on your sales side, channel partner side. And then the final thing is, how do you make it practical? And I talked about that a little bit before with the workaround culture. And that's really an important issue of what we try to focus on is how do you make it practical in an organization? We have an online program that's free. Stuart, as a champion, can be sending you information on that, how to register for it. 5-stage program. We also have a starter kit that we're launching next week that is an even lighter touch with some communication tools and some tips. All for free, all geared at trying to help improve cyber readiness in organizations and their value chain. So when we look at the 4 issues, and we're going to focus on software updates today, but just a couple things here. Why did we pick these 4? We picked these 4 because they're things that organizations and people in organizations deal with every day, and that the research that we got from organizations like Microsoft said that you could really get an 80% reduction in cyber risk if organizations got really good at these 4 things. So I'm going to focus on software updates. And the interesting thing here, and I talk about this to a lot of organizations, and it kind of opens their eyes, is that hackers monitor software patch releases. So if whether it's Microsoft or Adobe or any other organization that is providing software, when they release a patch, hackers are looking at those releases, and then they're immediately trying to identify what vulnerabilities the security patches are fixing. So it's a race against time at that point. So you can't just assume, oh, well, yeah, we got a patch, it's okay to wait for a long time on it. The hackers are looking at how to exploit the vulnerability that patch is intended to fix right away. So that's one thing I do want to emphasize around software updates, is that it is something there is, to an extent, a race against time. So here are a few tips, and then a lot of today is interactive, and again, these tips are really aimed more at the small, mid-sized business. But one, there should be some kind of a formal assignment about this. So within your organization or within the small companies you deal with, and a simple question to ask is, who's in charge of patching the software, updating the software? So is it one person? Or is it everybody's responsible for doing their own? But any organization should have an answer for this. Clearly, it's large organizations, it's centralized and it's pushed out. But in smaller organizations, we find that that's not always the case. So if you're going into a small organization that you do business with, that's a simple question that you can ask them. Who's in charge of updating the software? Promptly and routinely. I mentioned that before. That's really an important part of this. And, a lot of people say that, they want to do testing on updates before released. And I think in larger organizations, that makes a lot of sense. But by and large, in a smaller organization, if a company like an Adobe or Quicken is releasing a security update, by and large, we think it's the best approach is to update promptly. And related to that, we recommend that people turn on auto updates. So if it's decentralized in an organization, that auto updates are really a good way to do it. The other thing that we see in a lot of smaller organizations is a mix between company issued devices and personal devices that are used to access company information. And what happens here is that there's a lot of confusion about what software is actually being used on the devices that are accessing company data. And that's another really important thing to think about, is it's not just the information on the company the applications on the company issued computer or laptop, but if I'm using my own smartphone and downloading additional apps, and then accessing the company networks through my smartphone, that also is creating a pathway. So we want to make sure that the idea of software updates, what we always encourage is to think about it more broadly than just the company issued devices. But in a small company, to really think about all the different software or apps that have been downloaded onto a device that's accessing company information. And that's an important part for small companies. And one tip that we give small companies that really can make a difference is to think about all the different applications that are in use and make sure that they're all updated on a prompt fashion. So that really wraps up the intro of what I wanted to cover. Just to kind of highlight a couple things, give you a little background on our organization and our mission. As you'll hear about a little bit more, we're going to talk with David, and Stuart's going to bring up some of the other issues related to patching and software updates. We do have a lot of tools and other information available on these topics as part of our program. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Stuart.
Craig, thank you very much. Now I'd like to ask David Ortiz, the Chief Information Security Officer and Vice President at Bed Bath & Beyond, to give us a little bit of his perspective around software patching, both at a billion-dollar organization with a large, IT and cybersecurity organization, and then if he could, a little bit of perspective from a small organization. As I said, if he was a sole security practitioner or a part-time security practitioner, what would he be focused on, knowing he had limited amount of time and resources to be responsive to his organization. So with that, David, thanks so much for spending a few minutes with us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Stuart, and thanks, Craig. Great advice. So why is it important to keep software up to date with patching? Simply speaking, new vulnerabilities are announced every day. It's happening. To Craig's point about hackers keeping track of when vulnerabilities are announced, it's reality, and it's something that we deal with every single day. What I would say is the first step in managing what I call a vulnerability management program, which includes patching, is keeping an accurate asset inventory of your hardware, operating systems, applications, databases, software as a service. If the vendor is not responsible for software that they're running for you in the cloud, it's your responsibility to ensure that that software is being patched as well. And yes, this also includes other cloud-based applications or implementations that your company may be responsible for. So in addition to having what I would say is an asset management solution, I've also found that procurement teams and change management meetings are great sources of information to understand your assets. And I would say that ties back to small, maybe not so much small, but medium-sized businesses as well. So as you learn more about your organization's critical assets, or crown jewels as some people like to call them, my recommendation is developing a risk-based approach so you can prioritize your patching activities, and using vulnerability feeds that you may enlist from other companies, or use a lot of the available free feeds from vendors or companies. This is also going to help you with understanding your exposures to your environment, to help you with that risk-based approach and prioritizing what you're going to do. One piece of information that I would say is really important, and it really has taken shape, I would say, over the last year, is being very pragmatic about moving too quickly. You might not hear that a lot with patching and vulnerability activities, but I think with everything that's been in the news with Spectre and Meltdown and moving very quickly to apply patches that have just been released, I always say this to people and to my teams is, let's make sure we understand the impact of applying these patches and follow our procedures and our policies to ensure that we're testing these patches on lower environments, understanding performance impacts before they go into production. So it's yes, be pragmatic, understand and follow the steps that you've laid out prior, but also you may need to move quickly, right? If some of you are reading this data, reading vulnerability data or getting threat intelligence data for things like Bluekeep or an RDP vulnerability, that's potentially an area where, yep, you have limited time to be pragmatic about it, but you have to move very quickly. In addition to this, what I would say is, what processes do you have or should you have to really keep ahead of this. Your teams should have a predefined patching schedule. This could be tied to a vulnerability program. It could not be tied to a vulnerability program. I would bring those team members together to have them talk from time to time. It is good practice. These patching cycles should happen each quarter on their own. It should also happen as a result of some other scanning that's taking place in your organization, vulnerability scanning. If you have requirements for penetration testing, you'll understand about vulnerabilities in your software, on your operating systems and such, that definitely need to be addressed. And for some of the probably larger organizations or more application development centric organizations, application scanning is changing and really happening more earlier in the development process. I know a lot of you have heard the term DevOps or DevSecOps, but scanning is happening much earlier in the process now, as opposed to later with quarterly or annual vulnerability scanning or penetration testing. How does this apply to small and medium businesses? I would say the foundation or the framework is very similar. Being a single resource and managing many assets in an organization is definitely a challenge. Organize, right? And I do this with my team members almost daily. It's get organized, help other teams get organized, understand your assets, talk to people within your organization. Those are simple things that you can do just to lay that foundation and prioritize your activities. You know, I think you have to be honest about it, that you're not going to be able to do everything every single day, but being organized and understanding it from a risk-based approach on what you need to do on a single day if a critical vulnerability is announced is going to go a long way. It's also important to say, learn what other people are doing, right? Listening to Craig, listening to Stuart, seeing what the Cybersecurity Collaborative or CRI is doing or doing with other organizations. We learn from other people every single day, and that is valuable information. And lastly, I would say stay abreast of the news, but don't get caught up in the news, which is why I always like to say be pragmatic about this. We don't run around and go to other teams and say, hey, you have to patch this today. We have to be realistic about how things should operate in the environment and the impact to our business or the impact to our customers by performing an activity that isn't well planned out. And I turn it back over to you, Stuart.
David, thank you very much. Craig, do you have a couple of specific questions, you know, maybe from your perspective or some of your users or pilots about software patching? Otherwise, I have a couple of questions that have come in from our side as well.
Yeah, actually, I do have a couple questions for David. Given his role and the nature in an organization like Bed Bath & Beyond, David, you deal with so many different third parties as part of your value chain and different types of third parties. How do you extend the idea of cybersecurity, specifically related to patching? How does that get extended or communicated to your third parties?
Yeah, we have many third parties. I would say, you know, we're not unlike any other organization where a lot of this has started with a contract process and a risk assessment to ensure that we really understand who we're working with. And these are great best practices, right, that any size business can use to understand exactly who and what they're working with. It could be on the scale of working with, you know, much larger company like a Microsoft or somebody like that, to a smaller B2B where at times, you know, we we perform the same risk assessment with a large company versus a small company, but we really need to understand data that's being shared and really understand the risk to the organization if they are a smaller company and they may or may not have some of the security practices that the larger companies use.
And then anything specific to related to patching or software updates? Are there certain types of vendors where that becomes more of an issue than others?
Absolutely. So we work with firms that do application development with us. As that code is developed and moved along the development lifecycle, obviously their systems need to be at the same patch levels as our systems, and that is definitely something that's mandated and worked through, that they have to keep those systems up to date. We work with a lot of our larger partners, and from time to time we'll reach out, and when we're tracking a vulnerability or a critical software patch, we'll reach out to them and we'll make sure that they're aware of it from a timing perspective, and it's not going to lag in their environments.
That's great. And then one other question before it goes over to Stuart is, you mentioned, and I know in larger organizations, the idea of testing patches in non-production environments or lower in segments of the network makes a lot of sense. For a small company, if it's a 20-person company and they get a software update notice from Microsoft on O365, what do you think about them just like using auto update?
I think auto update's a great feature. Smaller companies, you are going to know your systems and your applications. It goes without saying, want to make sure you keep a backup of all your systems and applications. Auto update is a very powerful feature for those client or cloud-based applications to keep them up to date and to put as less stress on those resources as possible. So definitely a feature we employ in some areas, but in some areas we can't because of some of the application dependencies.
Right, makes sense. Stuart, back over to you.
David, one of the questions we got yesterday when we had a call with the SMEs was around cyber insurance, and they kept talking about, making sure you understand what is your critical data, what is the lifeblood of the organization, and then making sure all of the applications associated with that are well protected. Maybe you could think about it from a small company standpoint where maybe they don't have a lot of different applications, but the data is critically important, and they're the ones that are getting attacked most from a cyber standpoint, from a ransomware standpoint. How do you go about sorting your data, the applications, and making sure the critical ones are up to date? Any perspective on that? And then to upscale it to a large organization, how do you go about it that way?
Yeah, great question. It makes me uncomfortable every day when I hear the news about another city or a smaller company being impacted by ransomware. It's just it's unfortunate for those individuals, but putting myself in the situation of a small company, I've talked to organizations that have faced this, and they just don't know what the next step is. They unfortunately learned from that experience, but as you talk to companies that haven't experienced it, a lot of foundational items, right? As I mentioned, with backups, keeping up to date on software patching, just knowing those critical assets. So if I'm an organization and I sell bracelets, right? My customer data is very important to me. I want to make sure I understand my customer data. Obviously, my financial data and my strategy, if I'm going from bracelets to necklaces, is critical data for me that I haven't shared with anybody, but I want to keep confidential. So, as a smaller or medium-sized business, I want to make sure that I definitely have a handle on that data. if folks are unsure with that, I'll go back to talk to people in like businesses or talk to some of your partners and, see what they feel is critical, what may not have seemed critical to you from a data standpoint initially may be to them if you're sharing B2B data, or if you have a potential customer group that you're going to be working with that you want to keep that data safeguarded.
Stuart, let me just add to that a little bit. One of the things that we talk to companies about is to think in terms of the negative impact of data loss or compromise. So either it becomes unusable to them or it becomes publicly shared is one approach. And then the other is business continuity is a way to assess risk. So if I'm a small accounting firm and my website goes down for even a week, that is not that critical. But if I lose all my client data and all their tax ID numbers and social security numbers, that becomes a critical loss to my organization. If I'm a small e-com company and my website goes down for a week, that's critical because I'm losing revenue every day. And that might actually be a far more important loss than somebody, not being able to access our employee information for a week. So for each company, I think it's always a good idea for small companies to think about data loss and business continuity and think about risk in the context of those two things, and then use that to also prioritize about software and updates and patching.
David, any follow-on thoughts to those points?
No, those are terrific points. I would definitely recommend spending a little more time in those initial setups of working with a vendor or a partner, or within your own organization. Just spend a little bit extra time, make sure that you know that there is another copy of your data, or folks are not saving data locally and bringing it home, and they may have an accident, lose their laptop or something like that. So I would definitely say spend a little extra time up front and just organize, right? It's yes, smaller companies are short-staffed and people are wearing multiple hats, but it's going to definitely go a long way to go back to that foundation of having an awareness of where your data is located. Could be in the cloud, could be within your building on your laptop, but definitely saved, backed up somewhere else. And there's a level of resiliency that you can get that data back.
And then we got a question specifically about the administration. How do you handle who has access to do updates? How do you schedule the updates? How do you check and verify the updates are done? And then how do you report those updates to executives? And I think probably these are more on a smaller scale than a larger scale, but I think it'll allow you to kind of talk to some of the potential processes and fail-safes, if you will.
Craig, did you want to take that or do you want me to take it?
No, David, why don't you take that one?
Okay. Reporting is important. Again, starting with that foundation of knowing what you have and what you need to report on is important, right? Sharing that information with people inside of a small or a medium-sized organization. Again, wearing multiple hats is going to be tough, but starting with that initial, what I'd say is asset inventory, which includes not only hardware, software, or applications, but your data, your people. Having these asset inventories are critical, and it will make it easier over time to report on it. But knowing the schedules of when things may auto-update, to Craig's earlier points, is key, that you can ensure that those applications or systems have been updated. There is going to be work, right, to go and look and create those reports over time. Hopefully there'll be opportunities to automate it. but there will be work to review to ensure that things have been updated and patched. But again, these are critical activities to make sure that data is protected and the organization is protected.
You know, David, at CRI, we always think about cyber security as being a people, process, and technology issue. And one of the things, so you know, the patching itself is really a technology issue, but getting people to cooperate, and you know, whether it's centralized or decentralized, but getting people to be aware of the importance of it, and that if they've downloaded some software to work on a special project or something like that, that maybe didn't come through the IT department, that they need to keep that updated as well. What do you think in your organization? I'll steer this back to your organization. How do you communicate to people in your organization, and how do you try to encourage them to follow the cyber security policies?
Those are great questions. We want to enable the business. We want to move things forward at the speed of the business. It's tough to do that and not tell people to download things and use what they think is going to help them do their job. It's really a tough balance each day. So we have, as you can imagine, a robust suite of applications that our business team members use. We do have to prevent things from being downloaded, which we do with some of our other instrumentation. But we do a fair amount of reviews with people when they bring us a request that they want to use new software. We're very active in that area to ensure that that software or application is not going to do any harm to the organization, but it is a tough thing to ensure that we're not preventing people from doing their job and still enabling them. So giving them a robust set of enterprise applications is what we strive to do. Folks always want to use something new, so we evaluate that on a daily basis.
Stuart, back over to you.
David, we have a question we're actually trying to get clarified a little bit, but it was about enterprise being able to send available update messages to the systems. And I'm assuming what they mean is giving the employees updates that patches have been added and changes have been made, but I'm not completely certain. But maybe you could talk about, as you add patches, as you update, maybe a little bit around the education of the employees for what's now available in a new update, or maybe where a patch has corrected a problem.
Yeah, that area has changed a bit. Everybody's heard probably of a change management process or procedures and things like that. It's different now because with all of the software as a service and cloud-based applications, sometimes the IT departments are not in control of those updates. So what we've been trying to do is really work with the IT teams and provide more outreach to the end user. Examples of this is here's what's happening with this workplace management or collaboration tool, right? The vendors push to patch. We send our own notifications out to our end users, where in the past people would attend change management meetings. The entire enterprise is not attending that meeting, so they're unaware if a new feature is coming down in a word processing tool or something like that, or a chat type tool. There's outreach being performed with digests and notifications to all associates to make them aware there may be maintenance and there may be changes, or they're going to see something new. Where information security gets involved is when there's a new skin on an application, or the look and change of something may have changed. We want our associates to know that it's not fraudulent, It's not potentially a phishing scam. So we'll say, look, this login box for this critical application may change or is changing. So you will see a different face to this. It is our corporate application. Don't be alarmed. It's not a malicious attempt to get you to enter in credentials so someone can steal your data. So we do a fair amount of outreach in those areas to all of our associates. Some of the things that I've been working with some of the IT teams is around that outreach, because I feel it's critical to keep our associates up to date with technology and information security changes.
Great, that was very helpful. Thanks so much for that. What I would like to do now, Craig, maybe you can provide us maybe some next steps as from CRI standpoint as what you're looking to do as it relates to this particular topic. And then David, maybe you can provide for us a few lessons learned and next steps on what you would recommend people do, after this call. What are some things they ought to go think about? What are some things they ought to do within their organization as it relates to, specifically this topic and what they can do to be better prepared? Maybe we'll ask you to do that first and give them some thoughts, like I said, as they can get started and things they ought to be doing immediately. And then we will launch our poll questions at the same time, and then we'll take the last couple, if we get a couple of other questions, and then we can, and then we'll wrap up at close to the top of the hour. So David, could you provide maybe a couple of lessons learned or things you think people should do immediately to help them get started?
Yeah, we've briefly touched upon a bunch of them early on, and I'll go back to what Craig had started with, right? These are foundational items in regards to authentication, USBs, patching, etc. One additional note there is cloud file sharing websites, just to be very cognizant of where you're putting your data and where that data may be going. From a lessons learned standpoint, I would say over communicate, right? I think communication goes a long way, and just perform that outreach, which is what we're doing. From a lessons learned standpoint, we tailor a lot of our communication to folks to make sure that they really understand why we're doing the things that we're doing, as opposed to us just doing them, right? We're trying to protect the company's data. We're trying to protect our associates. We're trying to protect the same thing with our customers. So we in our travels each day, we're adjusting our communication. It's tough for me to give real life examples without sharing anything confidential. So I'm trying to think of some other items that I could share with you. But everything we touched on from a best practice standpoint is really key to this, right? Going out and making sure that you understand where your assets are, what your assets are, what's critical to running your business. If you haven't done that, think about it, right? It's not as hard as you may believe it to be. And just start jotting these things down. Before you know it, you're going to have what is probably a pretty robust list of your quote unquote crown jewels, and then taking the next step to make sure that you are patching software or patching systems, they're not out of date, and they're being managed, and you can report on that if need be, that yes, we know what these things are, yes, we've addressed these things this quarter. From a critical vulnerability standpoint, we're keeping abreast of that and making sure things are updated. Back up that data, right? Make sure as a small organization, you have a copy of it. Go get another machine and just make a copy of it. things aren't that terribly expensive anymore, or find a secure, inexpensive file sharing site that you can securely put your data on, and you know who has access to it. And there are multiple people who know how to access that data securely in the organization. So I would say, top of mind, those are a few things just to get a handle and organize and get your arms around everything within your company.
David, thank you very much. That's great. A couple of things. We're going to launch those poll questions. We'd appreciate it if everybody could answer those questions over the next couple of minutes. As I said, we are proud to be one of the champions of the Cyber Readiness Institute and participating with them and helping their users as they download the open source tools, and through our community membership have the ability to provide the next level of education for people that have questions and issues and access to our subject matter experts. We are in the midst of a focus group where we will have a beta program looking at specifically for sole security practitioners and part-time security practitioners, a program that's very implementable and consumable when people don't have much time. That will probably conclude that focus group. We've got over 100 people working on it around the country. It will probably conclude in the next 45 days or so. But if you'd like an update on that, you could click on our website, go to the beta program, and we're happy to get you involved with that. As I mentioned, this is the second of 4 of these open webinar calls that we are doing with the Cyber Readiness Institute. The next one will be on the 3rd pillar around improving your password game. It'll be September 19th. Matt Krause from the CISO from Taco Bell will be joining us with Kirsten Todd, the Managing Director of the Cyber Readiness Institute, talking specifically about password management, your password game, and the critical nature of that. And then Craig will be back with us on November 14th. On the topic of to protect your data from USBs and other dangers and storage devices. And we will have one of our members from one of our Fortune 1000 companies participating with Craig on November 14th. You're welcome to go to our website and register for those. The registration link is up for September 19th, and we will have it updated on November 14th shortly. With that, if you have any other questions, feel free to put them in. Otherwise, Craig, I'd like to turn it over to you to maybe give your some final thoughts and perspective and things that people can do next, either as it relates to software updates and software management, or just in general getting more involved with the Cyber Readiness Institute.
Great, thanks, Stuart. Yeah, in terms of the immediate things that you can do, I really echo what David said. Especially for small companies, knowing where the data is and backing it up is really critical. And if you actually, I do a lot of walking around when I'm inside companies and asking different people questions. And if you walk around in a small organization and find out, do people really know where the data is, or do people keep it locally? Is a bunch of stuff stored on a hard drive attached to somebody's computer that's not in the network? All of those things are things that are really common in small organizations, and that creates a problem. If you realize that accounting wasn't really backing everything up, that some things were kept like in a certain person's personal computer, all those are really big problems that can be solved. On a broader base, what we try to help organizations with is to create a culture of cyber readiness and to get practical with people. So, most people in a small organization, they don't really need to know the technical aspects. To David's point, they need to know why it's important, what the negative impact would be if we lost this data, or if it became public, or if our website went down or our email went down. What's the business continuity damage to us? But beyond that, what are some simple things that they can do to try to prevent risk. And we go back to these 4 pillars around the passwords, the patching, phishing, and USBs. And we find that phishing right now is getting the most press. People tend to be relatively familiar with the issues related to phishing. Not so great at identifying it, but we find that even small companies are getting a little bit better at that. In all of these areas, we provide really practical tools in our program. We advocate that companies pick a cyber leader in a small company that then becomes responsible, because we find a lot of small companies don't really have anybody responsible for cybersecurity. I mean, Bed Bath & Beyond has David, and David has a team, but if you're looking at a small company, and we've been working with 300-400 person manufacturing companies, that they might have an IT person, but they don't have anybody really responsible for cybersecurity. If you look at like the small accounting office or a small like design firm, a lot of them really don't have anybody. So picking that leader is critical. And ultimately, this is more of a big company term, but cross-functional collaboration is absolutely critical. So you need to have the people looking at this from different viewpoints. What is their functional responsibility in the company? And would this cyber policy prevent them from doing their job? And if the policies are going to prevent people from doing their jobs or make that difficult, you end up creating a workaround culture. So what we tried to do is to come up with some policies related just to these 4 topics for small companies that would be helpful and practical, kind of reduce the risk but not be overboard. Related to that, to David's point about communication, communication is key. And we've produced posters, email templates, training materials that are all free and available that people can download and modify. We've actually gotten pictures from organizations in a company in Egypt sent us a picture of our posters that were downloaded, translated into Arabic, and posted up throughout their organization in the coffee rooms and things like that. Anything to be able to build awareness around the issues is an important piece to building a cyber readiness culture. So that's part of what our program is all about, is people, process, and technology, and how do we help that people and process push ahead, because small companies are going to be reluctant to spend a lot on technology. And so we really come at it more from the people and process side for those small companies. Stuart, that's really kind of a thumbnail of what we're doing and where we're going.
Terrific. Well, Craig and David, I really want to thank you for doing this. Thanks for allowing us to be part of this, to do these sessions with the Cyber Readiness Institute. David, we really appreciate your time. You know, you're a great member of the Cybersecurity Collaborative, part of our Corporate Leadership Council, and I appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your day to help the users and the folks that are downloading the Cyber Readiness tools to answer some of their questions. With that, I just want to thank everybody for responding to the poll questions. We got great responses. It meant a lot to people. People got a lot out of it. So we appreciate your input. Thank you for responding to those. As I said, we have 2 more of these later this year that we are doing with the Cyber Readiness Institute. Please go to our website and get that information, get registered for it. And we'd appreciate it. And I know Craig would say the same thing, you know, go to the Cyber Readiness Institute site, register and download the tools and get started. We really believe that's a great way for you to get smarter and safer around cybersecurity. And if there's additional questions that you have beyond that and our community membership can help you, you know, please come back to us on that aspect, or get involved with our beta program for small sole security practitioners or part-time security practitioners. With that, I just want to thank everybody for their time. One of the things our CISO founders wanted to do was give back to the community, and for us to provide open webinars like this that are open to anyone, not just our members. And I want to thank you for being here today. And, you know, Craig and David, David, I'll give it to you if you've got any other last comments, and then we'll turn it over to Craig to close it.
I don't. Thank you very much, Stuart, Craig, and everyone. Good luck.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I do have one closing comment for anybody on the call that's part of a larger organization. Really think about using our materials to send out in your value chains. It could be a great way to start to build some cyber awareness and some cyber readiness in your value chains. So feel free to use it in that way. Our member companies like ExxonMobil and General Motors and Microsoft are using it in their value chains as a way to try to elevate. Companies that go through the full program, a certificate is generated. So it shows, now we don't do verification, but it shows that they've gone through the full program. We can track that. We can track that they've downloaded the materials. There are baseline and secondary metrics that are built into the program, real simple questions for them to answer. So that's one way that you can use this to help to spread cyber readiness in your value chains. We're also launching the starter kit next week, which is an even lighter touch. They don't even have to register. All they do is go there, they can take a look at it, download a couple things, and it really starts to get them going with some of the posters and some tips. So think about using it internally. If you're a larger company, think about pushing it out in your value chains. And if that's of interest to you, feel free to send Stuart an email or me an email, and we can follow up with you on that. Thanks very much, Stuart.
Well, David, Craig, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time today. It is great to partner with you and be part of the Champions program. And we look forward to having everyone on the next call with the Cyber Readiness Institute in September. And we hope to have you involved in any of our other open webinars or our community membership or beta program. Thank you very much for your time, and everybody have a great weekend. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.